I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thanks for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we continue our investigation into application domain intelligence, and our project starts with conditions. Now, conditions are something that we can evaluate, as I showed in my last Access video. We can evaluate using the eval function, not just in Access, but in many languages. But now we have the ability to look at any condition and evaluate it to true or false. And of course, if we can do that, then we can string conditions together in order to make a logical workflow. And that might be a value of a control on screen, or the return value from a user. They might get a yes or no, message box or something like that. And so you might guide the workflow depending on what happens there. And so today we cover conditions. This is the start of the programming on this project. Interested in more cool topics like this? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Now, you might remember from my last episode on application domain intelligence, we had this green box at the end of the discussion, which happened to have, this other stuff inside of it, which included evaluate a condition, prompt a user, or do some actions. And today we're going to cover evaluating a condition, which is one of the cornerstones of being able to do application domain intelligence, and that's what we're doing today. Okay, so I've got this empty file here. I've called it access_ADI for application domain intelligence. This is where we'll be doing some of our programming. We'll first be starting by creating a table here. We're going to create a table for conditions, and that table is going to have a condition ID, which we'll do as an auto number, and we'll also make that into the primary key for our table. We can do that by right-clicking on the field there, and we'll choose primary key. And then we're going to have a couple of fields here. So we're going to have one row for each condition. And so each condition is going to have a name, which we'll leave as a short text. I guess I'll put it as 50 characters. You can customize it to how you would like your app to run. And then we'll have a condition description, maybe a bit longer. These will be used very much later in the project when we start making these kind of things accessible to non-programmers. And so we'll be able to put descriptions on and names and friendly names so that your senior users or super users will be able to do their own sequences. And so our last field here is going to be condition, and that's going to be a long text. Some conditions are pretty long. I don't actually expect that we're going to go longer than 255 in this project, but you might, depending on the situation in your application or in your company. And then I'll hit save here, and I'm going to call this table ADI condition. And there's going to be several tables, so there's going to be ADI_node, which is going to have all the nodes. And then there's going to be some other ones like ADI_prompt and a couple others. So we're going to build those as we go here. But today we're starting with the condition. So this is going to be the first table. And we're going to start building some conditions. And in order to do that, I'm going to grab a little bit of data here from a very familiar table called Candy, which you guys probably know from my previous episodes. This is a very simple table. It just has some candy in it, and you can see here we've got some some chocolate, some toffee, some gumballs and things like that, and we have some prices as well, and that's really it for this table. It's really just for demonstration purposes, but we're gonna have a candy table, and we're gonna have a sort of unbound form. We'll make one very quickly here, just so that we have some controls that we can reference using an access reference expression in order to demonstrate the power of using eval for our true or false conditions. So just to build something very quickly here, I will grab a text field from the ribbon up above there, and we're going to call this the worker field, and then we'll have an unbound text box here just for demonstration called txt worker, and we can go ahead and copy that control, and so I'll do a Control C, Control V, and that's going to copy and paste both the text box and the associated label, and we'll put in Shift for this one. These aren't super important. This is really just to show that we can get the values off of here, and we may use these more in our upcoming episodes. There we go, we've got our Shift text box there as well as a worker text box, and I'll go ahead and grab a button as well. We may not use it in this episode, but we might use it in our upcoming episodes just to show something that looks like what a form might look like as somebody's working away here. So we'll call this one CMD Shift Start, and we'll be good to go. Let's give that button a caption here, so we'll just drop our cursor on there and we'll just call this Start Shift. So there we go, we've got a very basic form with a couple of fields and a button on it, and we're going to use these for demonstration. There's a Shift Start and a worker field, and now what we can do is we can go ahead and we'll save this, and I'll just call this the Shift form, and that should do it for now. So now we have a very simple form, and we've got an ADI condition table and a candy table, and these are three objects that we can use in order to do some demonstration. And of course from there we can go ahead and we'll open our ADI condition table, and now we can do some loading of our table with some conditions that we can evaluate to true or false by using the eval function. And so for our first condition, we could do something like check to see if a particular candy is still being sold, and that will evaluate to true or false. And so we can set up that condition by using functions and things that evaluate to a true or false. And so in order to make a true or false statement, as an example, we can use dlookup. And so in this case what we'll do is we'll look for an ID, and if there's an ID for the particular candy in the table, we know that we are still selling it in this case. And so what I'll do is I'll put in the dlookup expression, or the dlookup function, into the text of the condition field. And so you can see I'm building it here. I think I need another double quote on the end there. And so this is a full dlookup function, but we don't want to get the value here. We want it to evaluate to true or false. And so I put does not equal null on the end of there, because we know that if something is not found in dlookup, it'll evaluate to a null. And so by adding the does not equal null onto the end of that, which is actually the VBA expression, we're actually asking whether the dlookup outcome was null or not, and that is a true or false. And so that is one condition that we can add. So you can think up all kinds of scenarios that where you could check values and things like that. One of them is using all of those domain functions, and other ones might be expressions, which we can show here, where we might have a condition called Jim signing in. Is it Jim signing in, right? Something simple like that. You can imagine that this is a very simple condition, but these might become more and more complex as time goes on, and as you string them together into many, many checks. And so here we go. We can do our access expression. We can say, forms. I think it was called shift form. So I'll put in shift form here. I've forgotten already. So here we go. There it is. So it's shift form. Okay. So the shift forms, shift form, and then txt worker. is the name of the control, so we can just say that is equal to Jim. And that is a true or false statement. It either is or it isn't. And so we can evaluate that by using our eval function, and that is exactly what we want to see in the table here. And so you might be wondering, I've got my fizzer check, I've got Jim signing in, I could create 100 or 1,000 more conditions that could be used as checks in my application here. There's a does not equal null. You could have an is null there, maybe checking for an empty value. And you can see that this is very similar to validation. And so a lot of you might be thinking, well, I could do this programming with just code and just do some validation. And that is actually true. But in many, many cases, it just gets too crazy and too big for hard-coded values. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Create ribbon, and we're going to go to the macros and code and choose a new module, or you might just see the new module button on your ribbon. And that's going to create a new module. I hit the Save button there, and I'm just going to call this ADI for Application Domain Intelligence. And we can go ahead and get started. So we're going to program a series of functions. Today we're going to be doing one for conditions, but we will be also doing functions for our nodes, our actions and prompts and things like that. And so as we grow our model here, you're going to see it get more complex and be able to handle more and more complexity in an easy way compared to what you might do if you had to code everything yourself. And so what we'll do is we'll create a new function. I'm going to call it condition is true. That seems pretty easy to understand there. And we're going to pass into that the ID number of the condition that we want to evaluate. Because what's going to happen is eventually, once we build our model and our workflow, every little step of the workflow is going to evaluate some condition to true or false. And so we're going to use this condition is true function in order to do that. So one of the variables that we're going to use in our function is going to be a variant, and I'll just call that return value. And the next variable I will create will be the Boolean variable, and it is going to be called is true. And so we will set is true equal to false at the very start of our function here, and at the very end of the function we'll return whatever value the is true Boolean has been set to during our processing. Then we will add one more variable for the expression that we're going to evaluate, and so we'll create a string variable for that, and we will set that equal to whatever expression that we get out of the table for the condition long integer that is passed into this function here. And so we can go our return value is equal to a DLOOKUP. Now the DLOOKUP can return a null or it can return a value, so that's why we want to use a variant there. And so we'll do a DLOOKUP, and I'm just going to check the name there. It's ADI condition, and so we're going to look for the condition field in the table ADI underscore condition, and we'll go where the condition ID is equal to the variable that was passed into this function. And so that's going to return either a number, because that is an integer field, or it's going to return a null. And so that is our first step in getting our expression that we want to evaluate. And we need to handle the case where we pass in a number that doesn't have a condition associated with it, and that's why we're using the is null is equal to false. So we're only going to look for the condition if we don't get a null. Otherwise, the is true Boolean stays false, and then the actual function returns false. So that's all you need to know there. And then if we know that we got a value, well, we can set our string, our expression string, equal to the value of that variant and convert it to a string. That's going to give us our str expression. And once we have that expression, well, what do? Well, we use our eval function, just like we worked on in my previous episode on eval, except in this case we have only a true or false being returned. So we know that this is only going to return true or false, and that is going to make it so that we can create some logic around that, and it's going to be very, very powerful. So there's our expression. It's going to be evaluated using the eval function. That's going to return a true or false, and then we'll return that value to the user or to another calling function or whatever. And so I'll do a debug compile on that and just have a quick look at my, to make sure I didn't do any spelling. Oh yeah, I got one spelling mistake over here. Condition ID, that's probably important. And there we go. So let's give it a try and see what we get here. There we go. So we're going to use the question mark in the immediate window to ask for the value of this function if we pass in some number. So we're going to pass in 1, and you can see I already broke it. It looks like the expression I entered, so candy ID. So I think I made a spelling mistake in my expression, so let's go fix that. So that was in the table. Let's go grab that table and fix our expression. So that's the ADI condition table. And you can see I put in the candy ID. I assumed that was the ID, but actually the ID is just called ID, I think, in that table. So let's give that a try. And so you can see how you can troubleshoot when you have issues with your expressions. You can troubleshoot them very easily by going back and forth between the table and the immediate window if you want to try certain things. There we go. So I put condition is true with a 1 there, and that returns a true. So that's good. So that means that we do have candy in that table with the name Purple Fizzers. So check to sell that we still sell Purple Fizzers returns true. And so we could use that for further logic or whatever, and that logic has been completely removed from programming, and it is now sitting in tables, which is great. So that's what we want to see there. So now we could test out our forms. Shift form worker is equal to Jim. So I'll save that table, and I can open the shift form like we had there. And there we go. We've got our worker and our shift. So let's put in Bob instead. We'll put him on the chocolate shift. I'm not sure that I'm going to use all of these today, but we'll give this a try. And so now you've got a worker. They have their form open with some values in it, and they're about to start their shift. And if you wanted to check and see if condition 2 was true, you can put condition 2 in. And that is returning a false because the person in the txt worker field is in fact not Jim, it's Bob. So let's change that back to Jim, or change it to Jim, and we can do the same thing. We'll bring up our immediate window here, and we'll rerun the same function. We can delete the previous one there, hit enter, and we get true. And so this is very, very powerful. This is what we want to see here. Now we have the ability to create conditions with friendly names in our table that we can use later to evaluate all kinds of conditions in our application. Those could be anything from, temp bars to, global variables to, form values and all kinds of things. But it also can be used in a very, very simple way when you just want to force the logic of your sequence of events, and you can do things like just put in true. So our condition name is true, and we could just say just check true, and then put in true for the condition, and we could do the same thing for false, and that would give us a false result. So you might have times when you're building nodes and you actually just are gonna, put a true or false in there directly so that logic goes a certain way depending on certain circumstances. So that's something to check out, but we'll just do it as a test here just for demonstration purposes. So now we have a condition ID just for true and one for false, sort of the opposite of a complex true or false statement or condition. And so now we can put in, condition is true for number 3, and that'll of course return true, and condition is true for which will return false. And so those are going to be handy as we go on and build these further. Our next episode is going to be on prompts, and then we'll be covering actions, after which we'll start building nodes and defining triggers, and that's where the real magic starts to happen, and it's going to be super cool. Need to automate time collection for your entire team? Make sure to check out my time collection solution. The link is in the description.